I hope that if you can stay, you will, to listen to May Bowley, the executive director of Repurpose Savannah. I think you're really going to enjoy hearing what's going on in a group that is, years ahead of where Nantucket is now and where we could potentially go. Really inspiring. And anyway, so there's that. Okay, you're not getting up. That's great. Repurpose Savannah is a Women Plus led nonprofit establishing a sustainable future through the deconstruction and reuse of historic buildings. Repurpose Savannah, hold on, let me put this up here, advocates for, where did I? Thanks. Advocates, educates, and provides a climate-conscious alternative to conventional demolition that mitigates environmental and public health impacts. They connect best practices for structural removal with historic preservation, emphasizing research and documentation to provide the diverse histories in their communities. They train Women Plus, including women identified, trans, non-binary, and other underrepresented women for careers in construction. May moved to Savannah in 2015 and became enamored of the city's historic buildings and romantic tree canopies. When she enrolled in historic preservation courses at Savannah Technical College, her interest in buildings turned into a passion for building materials. Now in her role as the executive director of Repurpose, she is professionally obsessed with old-growth lumber. Before she got bit by the historic building bug, she was creative director for a manufacturing firm and market manager for an urban farm and a principal in her own marketing consultancy for creative startups. May holds a Bachelor of Art in Graphic Design and a Bachelor of Art in Classical Archaeology from the Florida State University, along with a Master of Art in Art Education from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Please join me in welcoming May.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you for having me. This has been such an inspiring day. What an honor to be here in this community that's really looking to the future, looking to innovate and create a bright new world where history and sustainability can come together for the benefit of this whole beautiful community. Also, I got to say, this is my first time in Nantucket, and I'm just charmed to pieces, and I'm so grateful to be here. So without further ado, I don't need to cover this. I think we've got it. I put this slide up here because I'm often giving presentations in places that don't know what I'm talking about. But I left it in my presentation here for you today because I just like to underscore that deconstruction is a climate conscious and a preservation minded solution for structural removal. And that means it is not a green light to start tearing down our historic properties. I think there's a lot of fear sometimes in the preservation community that when we talk about deconstruction, we're talking about just willy-nilly going in there and taking all the old buildings down and replacing them with bright, shiny new buildings. As has been said by our colleagues here today, that is not necessarily the more climate-conscious solution. I'm a die-hard preservationist. The most sustainable building is one that's already standing. And the day that preservation is successful, keeping every historic building standing, I will happily hang up my crowbar and go home and find a different job. But for the time being, we are losing our historic structures to the landfill. So how can we take care of them, even in the face of that structural loss? And this is how. People will be familiar with deconstruction in usually some aspect. So I like to clarify that even in this niche of the industry, there's a lot of variety. Most people are super familiar with what I call non-structural, but what you all probably will most recognize as architectural salvage. And these are the cute pieces. These are your mantles, your doors, your corbels and windows, all the pieces that do have high reuse potential. People are very familiar with this idea of building material reuse. We also see in this industry structurally compromising decon. What is this? Decon being short for deconstruction, excuse me. What is this? This is the result of some folks realizing that there is a high value in the structural members of historic buildings and going in, sometimes without permission, and stealing them and bringing them to market to make a lot of money. More often than not, this precipitates the loss of the building, and it also makes it more dangerous for my crew to come in and take it apart to do what's best for the community. Unfortunately, this is the legacy of what salvage has become in the past few decades. It's not the only legacy, but it is certainly there. I'd like to see this put to an end. We need to be taking care of our buildings responsibly, and we need to acknowledge that reusing them doesn't have to look like, carnage, ripping them apart to sell them on the black market. Let's bring this into the light and realize that this has a healthy expression as well. So what my nonprofit offers is full service structural removal. At the end of the day, you're going to see probably the same thing that you'd see at the end of a deconstruction job, which is a clean dirt site. However, as you'll see in the course of my presentation, these two processes couldn't be more different. Full service in the sense that we provide removal of the structure, absolutely, all the way from the ridge beam down to your piers. We also research and document your building. We're also going to help you out with your permitting. We're going to do whatever we can. Anybody who's interested in this service, we're going to do what we can to help you access it. That's because this is new, or as we'll see, it's new again. And sometimes people need a little help to do the right thing, right? If we just make it easy, they'll do it. They'll do the right thing. We've talked a lot about how deconstruction is not new here on Nantucket, and that's true all over the country. So deconstruction and reuse, it doesn't stop with taking the building apart, but it really is this whole cycle, taking them apart and then reusing those materials. It is a practice as old as building itself. Demolition, as we'll see, is a pretty newfangled idea, but for the depth and breadth of human history, this is what we've done with our built environment. It would never have made any sense to take perfectly good building materials and put them in the trash and then go out into the wilderness and try to harvest brand new materials for our buildings. For time out of mind, this has been a traditional practice, and we most certainly approach it as a traditional craft. I'm happy to say that we're gaining some traction in the preservation community, being recognized as a heritage trade, and one of the aspects of training in traditional craft trades across the country. I'll talk about that a little bit more. This is a great article I recommend if you're curious about the history of deconstruction and reuse outside of Nantucket. This is written by my friend Allison Arlotta, and it's about deconstruction around the turn of the century in New York City. There is an incredibly cool time-lapse video on this webpage that shows a skyscraper in New York City being unbuilt brick by brick, something that is so beyond what we think about as possible today, but we've done it before and we can certainly do it again. I know that this is true because we do a lot of research, but I also know that this is true because I've taken many buildings apart, over 40 buildings in the last few years, and I have never taken apart a building where I didn't find evidence of building material reuse in that structure. We're talking about historic Savannah. It's a wonderful place. It's been a wonderful place since it was founded. Really significant and amazing buildings. There was also a lot of wealth there, so there wasn't necessarily a need for secondhand materials. And yet, even in fine homes, we see building material reuse. Why? Because it was just sensible. This is a wonderful property out in Vernonburg. Broke my heart to take this building apart. It often breaks my heart to do this work, but it was going to go to the landfill, so you better believe I got in there and saved every stick of it. And here in the roof, you can see used as studs, a bunch of old rafters. These are obviously rafters in the same house. They've got the bird mouth cut out of them, and then where those little rafter tails stuck out, they got painted more than once, as you can see. Same building, once we've had the finishes stripped off, and you can see even more evidence of building material reuse. Isn't this stunning? It looks like a painting. You can see the different colors of the wood, the different ages of the wood. You can see some of it's been painted, and some of these have been stained. Some of them had a rounded edge. They were probably baseboards. Some of them had notches taken out of them where they passed over a window opening. They might have been sheathing in a different building, but now they're sheathing in a different location. Evidence upon evidence. I could show you a zillion slides of this, but you'll have to come to another presentation of mine for those. All of this to say, not a new idea, and certainly not an outlandish one, something we can do, we have done, and we can continue to do. So how did we get here? The age of demolition. I said before, demolition's a bit of a newfangled idea. Anybody know how old demolition is? Without polling the class, I'll just give you the answer. It's less than 100 years old. Demolition was invented after World War II. That was 80 years ago, folks. And yet somehow this has become so ubiquitous in our public consciousness that we can't imagine doing anything differently. But believe it or not, the technology that we use to demolish our domestic environment was not invented to do this. It was invented for the war effort. In World War II, many of you will be familiar with the famous CBs, the engineering corps of the US Army, largely given credit with being one of the most significant factors in Allied victory in World War II. And the CBs specifically worked to facilitate the movement of tanks, troops, equipment, and supplies across the European theater. And this technology, the bulldozer, the excavator, these were invented to clear bombed out cities so that we could move through them after an attack. These were invented to clear the natural landscape to facilitate the movement of those products and humans across space. And then what did we do? Well, we won the war. Good job, Seabees. A+, go Allies. And after the war, we had a new technology. We had the manufacturing capacity for this technology, and we had millions of young American men who'd been trained in the operation of this technology. So we brought them home, and we put them to work in the American landscape. And there's a couple of things you will realize are the direct result of this technology. The first being urban renewal, which was the largest scale clearance of any domestic landscape the human race had ever seen, which was clearing this idea that we could very quickly, efficiently, and cheaply get out with the old and in with the new. We also know that this work was done along heavily racial lines, along wealth and poverty lines, in a way that the legacy is still with us in association with demolition. Problematic, right? We also know that this technology directly resulted in the building of the US highway systems, right? Which, of course, Eisenhower, he was stressed after seeing how hard it was to move around Europe, realizing how large America was. He wanted to build a highway system to ensure that if we were ever invaded, we could easily move tanks, troops, airplanes, and supplies across our own landscape. So we got to work tearing down America as fast as we could, and we haven't seen demolition at that scale until recent times, since urban renewal. And now we're in a period of the greatest clearance of the domestic environment, of course, again, in our history for the first time. I like to point that out because I think a lot of people don't realize just how short-sighted this methodology was. It was invented at a time when they couldn't possibly imagine running out of landfill space. And yet how quickly, because of how destructive, how short-sighted, and how non-circular, how linear take, make, waste this is, we very quickly, in the span of less than 100 years, reached the terminus. And we're now trying to handle the fallout of this relatively bad idea. And what does that fallout look like? Without belaboring the point made eloquently by so many of my friends here today, I'd just like to point out that construction and demolition generates more than twice the municipal solid waste across the country. And that means if you took the garbage generated by every American in a year and you put it in a big pile, that pile would be less than half the size of the pile that's generated by the construction and demolition industry alone. That's an issue. Roughly speaking, an American generates in their lifetime about the same amount of waste as you'd expect to see in an American house. So if you keep one house out of the landfill, you've offset the lifetime of an entire American. So I like to say, I'm in the clear, everybody on my team is in the clear, and now we got to work on absolving all of your carbon impact, one building at a time. Globally speaking, reports are suggesting that C&D is responsible for a third of the world's waste. One industry alone. It is our single biggest contributor to waste. Time to work on this, folks. It is important to me to also talk about the public health aspect. It was mentioned earlier that one of the major drivers of policy in Portland, the first city in our country to have policy around deconstruction, one of the major drivers was the demolition dust and the noise. That dust is highly hazardous to our health. There have been countless studies about the negative health impacts of demolition dust. And in my city, we've dug in on the research on this to try to see who is the most affected. My city being Savannah, Georgia, reminds me a little bit of Nantucket in some ways, but in other ways it's an incredibly different place. And we see that the vast majority of demolitions are occurring to historic buildings. That's 72% for the year here. That the vast majority of the population around those demolitions are low-income communities and communities of color. So now we know that those public health impacts are being borne by the most vulnerable people in our communities. And this should activate you immediately. It certainly activates me. We can look at other social impacts of the shift from deconstruction to demolition, namely fewer jobs. Now, we didn't see a reduction of the workforce when we saw a switch from about 6 jobs to 1 job, from deconstruction to demolition. What we saw was an increase in the demolition work. So we're talking about that demo boom, right, after World War II. And that increase in clearance, right, which had never been seen before on the surface of planet Earth, right, has gotten us to where we are in terms of Workforce shifting. We're going to talk about workforce quite a bit here because I know we have our builders here with us and online, and I'd like to speak directly to you all because, as has also been said, y'all are the most important drivers of this change, and you're the ones who are actually going to be doing it. I should say we, because I'm here today with you in my steel toe boots, because I am going to San Antonio directly after here to do some more training with the beautiful folks who are digging in down there. And my suitcase is small, so steel toe boots it is. Mary did a great job talking about our mission a moment ago, and I'm just going to touch on it again. Now I'm going to talk about the repurpose model. We've talked about what has happened. We've talked about what needs to happen. And now let's talk about what is happening. This is where it gets exciting for me. We are looking at a climate-conscious solution for structural removal. We are looking at tying structural removal of historic buildings to best practices for historic preservation. These two things must, in my opinion, get tied together. Anytime that we're losing a historic building, those preservation best practices need to be foremost in our mind, right? Yeah, we can save the planet. We can also document our history, and we can do a lot more than that. We can train all kinds of folks to do this work. At Repurpose Savannah, our research and documentation looks like an archive on our website. I highly encourage you to visit repurposesavannah.org and go to our projects tab if you want to see some of the projects we've worked on. And not just see what they look like, learn all about them. You're going to know who lived there. You're going to know what they did. You're going to know what the industry in that neighborhood was. You're going to know if we can find out who the architect was. You're going to know what it was like for us to take that building apart. And you're going to know what products came out of that building and potentially, if we've done our job well, what they've become in their second life. We do our best to attach all of this information to every piece of salvage that comes out of our operation. We work with a number of local businesses to do this. We can't do everything on our own, and community is without a doubt the biggest factor in the success of a project like ours. Keep that in mind. Look around you. These are your friends. These are your allies who are going to help you pull this off. So we work with Ethos Preservation. They do a deep dive in the history, and they find wonderful documents. Savannah is a very well documented place, as I'm sure Nantucket is as well. We have a deep history of preservation ideology, which means we can really find a lot of great stuff. So you can read all of that. You can see old plat maps and such to understand how our neighborhoods have evolved. We also work with a local company called Shamrock to do 3D scans of our buildings. We got to make sure that even once this building is gone, you can still walk through it. You can know what it felt like and what it looked like and how it sat on its site. I believe in this technology so much. This is what's called a dollhouse view, but you can zoom right in and walk through the structures. You'll be more familiar with this in terms of real estate. Folks in real estate are using this a lot now so that you can take tours of homes without having to go to them physically in person. Wonderful tool for research and for documentation of our historic buildings. But for me, I'm a junkie, as was said earlier. I'm a junkie about historic lumber and about historic building practices. I'm a nerd about traditional lumber milling. I'm a nerd about traditional craft. So when we have gotten it scanned and then we get to work cleaning out the interior, we get it scanned again so that you can walk through the building with all of the finishes stripped off. And you can learn, our students of preservation and our students of building can learn about how that building was built. You can interact with the materials. You can pinpoint where it is on that fluid timeline from timber frame to balloon frame to stick frame to modern construction. Every building is somewhere on that continuum, and I've never seen one that is clearly one or clearly the other. There are always these traces and overlaps. So every time we lose a historic structure, we're losing a lot of data about the history of the built environment, and I just can't have it. So we need to capture it twice to make sure that we know as much as we can. What's great also about this service is it's really economical for us. Not only do they produce these incredible walking tours of the structure, but they'll also produce facade drawing elevations. They'll produce floor plans, site maps for us. And these are robots that are doing this work. So it's highly affordable. It's wonderful for my clients. It doesn't add a lot to the cost of the removal of the building. And it's a way that we can contribute to the archive without having to, break the bank. Here's another example of some fine detail for one of our projects, or another one. This one actually we ended up being able to save because, it had a terrible fire, and everybody said it was a total loss. You know me, you'll know I don't think there's any such thing. So we got in to clean it up And once all of the worst of the damage was out, the bones looked pretty good. So we got an engineer in there to say, yep, good to go. And the building got restored. Isn't that a happy story? That would not have happened if deconstruction didn't exist. That building would have just been demolished. So there it is, preservation, folks. This is a benefit, and this is a preservation practice. So very quickly, I know we've covered a lot of this stuff before. What do trees do? Man, they eat carbon. It's their job. They're real good at it. And then we make houses out of that. And then as they age and they fall into decline, we start to identify them as a risk or a liability, tragically. Not all of them are restored, unfortunately. And sometimes folks need to absolve themselves, or municipalities need to absolve themselves of this risk and liability. So what do? We put them in the landfill. Out of sight, out of mind, problem solved, right? Where, of course, they spit all that carbon back out into the atmosphere, which contributes to the intensity of storms, which contributes to the risk and liability of our declining building stock. However, this can be modified. It's a gentle tweak. What if when trees ate carbon and we made buildings out of them and they started to fall into decline, we recognize that these are now assets for our community. And what do we do with assets? We certainly don't put them in the landfill, right? We steward them and we take excellent care of them and we bring them to bear to generate more for our community, right? We're going to invest in the future of these assets. So we're going to deconstruct this for materials. And this is, instead of spitting out carbon and methane and all kinds of nastiness, it's going to create other things. It's going to create jobs. It's going to create a product with an economic value. And it's going to create meaning in our community that's going to circulate over and over again. This is my favorite part. I like the squishy stuff. And I can tell you countless stories. Please come visit me in my lumber yard where I will bend your ear on the fascinating history of every stick of lumber in our large facility. These materials, of course, most importantly, can go back into the repair of our precious building stock and help keep more structures from being lost to decline. Historic building materials are, without a doubt, the best thing to use to repair your historic building. Anybody who works in old buildings will tell you such. So let's save it so we can use it to save more buildings standing and lose fewer of them to the landfill. Guess what? This also has a major benefit for us in terms of resilience. You guys are probably really a lot more familiar with that term here in Nantucket than a lot of people are. This is a place that has been focused on resilience for a long time, and that's really impressive and very cool. But in Savannah, we experienced this in a really primary sense during the pandemic. There was a lumber crisis. I'm not sure how it affected you here. Was it bad? Yeah, man, it was bad in Georgia too. It was really bad. The crummy 2x4 from Home Depot that usually costs you $3 costs you $20, and nobody wants to buy a crummy 2x4 for $20. We, on the other hand, because if I don't know about up here, but there was definitely a building and demolition boom that coincided with COVID, right? So we were up to our ears in work. We had more work than we could handle. In fact, we still have more work than we can handle. I'm working really hard to try to cross-train other teams in Savannah to keep up with the demand for deconstruction services. So what that meant was that we had more supply than we'd ever seen. And while the price of your crummy lumber went through the roof, our prices stayed exactly the same. So when you're looking at a crummy 2x4 versus something that is incredibly solid, historic, old growth timber that stood in perfect condition in a house for 150 years and is still in better condition than that new one you were just going to buy at Home Depot. And when that price is pretty similar, a lot of folks came over to our place and were converts of historic lumber. It also meant that we had a resource in a time of crisis that other places who didn't have a circular economy did not have. We were very proud to be able to service our community and keep all those homes in great repair in a time when the larger infrastructure couldn't satisfy their local community needs. This is something we should all take really seriously. Instead of a pile of rubble at the end of a demolition, you can start to see the real value in this work when you're interacting with these products. This is just a tiny, tiny taste of the kind of products that we have available at our facility. You wouldn't believe how much timber there is in a historic building. If you build buildings for a living, you probably know about it. But until you've handled every stick of lumber in a building, you just can't imagine the volume of what is being lost when we only focus on our architectural finishes. Doors and windows are lovely. I love them and we save them. But for me, it's about the lumber. The floors are easy to sell. The timbers are harder, but we've been really successful at building that market. Building the market is the harder part of this equation, but it can be done. We're only 5 years old, and we have grown significantly. I've been in charge for 4 years. We have a team of 12 people. Everybody makes a living wage, and we do better year over year. We're looking at a target budget of about $850,000 this year. We were 20 grand in debt 4 years ago. So that is really rapid growth, and that's in Georgia, where the economy looks a little different than it does maybe up here in New England. All this product has a real value, not only a monetary value and not only a structural value, but a cultural value, something that we take really seriously. When you buy a piece of salvage from Repurpose Savannah, you're going to get a receipt in your email, because we don't print on paper, sustainability. And in that receipt, there's going to be a link to those research pages that I showed you on our website of the house that every single piece of that salvage came out of. So not only do you now have this beautiful, high-quality, affordable material that you can reuse in your home, but you've connected to the history and the past of it. You can share it with your friends, tell those stories over and over again. And the great news, of course, is that instead of sending my money to the landfill as a business owner, and instead of paying a lot of money for maintenance and fuel of machines, I get to give my money to my staff. Deconstruction is about 6 times more labor than demolition. And when it comes down to my community as a small business owner, I'm a nonprofit owner, but we really operate like a small business. I am way more interested in paying my community, spending that money on some humans than I am in sending it to the landfill. And I need to tell you guys, we're able to keep 75 to 95% of our buildings out of the dump. Those of you who work in demolition, you'll know that the bulk of your cost is going to be tipping fees. And that's in Georgia. Here, it's a totally different ballpark. The cost to demolish up here, man, wow. We could do a lot with the kind of budgets that y'all are spending to put all of this in the trash. We could do a lot of good for our communities, and we can build a really powerful workforce, really meaningful, rewarding jobs, and keep that money circulating in the hands of our residents here on Nantucket. And we can do this across the country. Without repeating my friends who went before me, of course, Portland being the first city in our country to pass policy, and there are a couple of things we can learn from what's gone on there. Believe it or not, fewer historic buildings are now demolished in Portland, and that's due to a number of reasons. Number one, it takes a little longer. So not only will people do the right thing if you make it easier, they'll also not do the wrong thing if you make that harder. So taking longer to take an old building apart sometimes is enough to convince a person to just restore it instead. Believe it or not, what an impact that's made, and what a great selling point to our friends in preservation who are worried that getting behind deconstruction as a preservation practice is going to culminate in the loss of more historic buildings. We've actually seen the opposite. More historic buildings are staying in repair. The second factor, of course, being the abundance of appropriate materials to keep those historic buildings in repair. This is important for our workforce people here. In more than 50% of the deconstructions in Portland, additional hazardous materials have been discovered in the course of that decon. So what that means is, if that building had lead and asbestos in it before it was taken down, and that material was abated, in the course of taking the building apart, more of it was found, and they were able to go in and abate that. But if that had been demolished, what we're saying is, even if all demolitions are properly abated, which we know they're not, but even if they were, half of those still have more harmful asbestos in them after the fact, and we're spreading that all over our neighbors, and I'm not into that personally. What's so great about places that are finding success through deconstruction policy is that we're able to save more and more buildings over time. In the original expression of the policy in Portland, it was buildings built 1915 or before, and it's been so successful that they've now bumped it up to 1940. They're doing the same thing in San Antonio. I can't remember the exact dates, but they've started with, I believe it's 1920 and older, and now they're already looking at moving forward to 1940 and older, keeping more of their beautiful heritage materials. And I gotta tell you, they're gorgeous in Texas, very different than what we're dealing with in Georgia, but beautiful, keeping it out of the dump and giving it back to the community to use for all number of expressions. So of course, we're seeing this all over the country. Palo Alto has a 100% demolition ban. It is a small community, much like Savannah or Nantucket. Small communities really do have the power sometimes to affect a lot more change than bigger communities. Really exciting to see. And I like to point out at this point as well that every community's needs are very different. Of course, we know that because of our other presentations here today. Your policy is going to look different than any policy that's been successful anywhere else. Do take the time to make sure that you're custom tailoring this for your own needs. San Antonio, Texas, of course, 7th largest city in the country. And boy, if they can do it in Texas, we can sure do it, right? Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We've got people working in Ithaca, New York on policy, people in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Nantucket, and of course, we are working on this in Savannah, Georgia. We decided after feasibility studies in the state of Georgia that leading with the stick, as it were, wasn't going to work. We needed to lead with the carrot. So we're taking the carrot approach. We are proving the model. We are building the infrastructure. We're making it work in an economically viable and replicable way so that then we can follow up with policy. Because, Georgia is one of the cheapest states to landfill in the nation. Demolition is fast, cheap, and easy. Labor costs are low. So if we can do it, again, if we can do it in Georgia in a way that's still profitable and we're able to create quality of life for our staff, benefit our communities, save our historic heritage, surely we can do this in other places as well. I work with a small group, Savannah Decom Policy Coalition. We have some materials I'd be glad to share for your efforts, but we've also gotten a little creative. As I said, we're not going with the stick, we're leading with the carrot. So we're trying to be creative about ways to ramp up towards something like a policy or an overarching ordinance. Some of the successes we have had already with our local government are now in Savannah, if you want to apply for a demolition permit for a building of a certain age, regardless of whether or not it's in a protected district, you have to document that building, and you have to submit that documentation as a gift to the archive before you get your permit to remove the structure. This is amazing. This is a great leap forward. It was spearheaded by our Office of Municipal Archives, who were inspired by the work that we do, and they thought, shoot, why can't we require this? And it turns out we can. Something else we've had great success with is working with our local commissions to put conditional approval on the demolitions of any buildings within a historic district. And what that means is, in the rare case that a historic building is approved for demolition, it's actually not approved for demolition. It's approved for removal on the condition that you hire a salvage company to deconstruct and reuse that material. That's been incredibly helpful. It is, of course, subject to turnover in the commission, so we hope that we are able to maintain our allies there and keep more of these beautiful properties out of the landfill. But until of course we're able to put in place something that is a lot stronger, something like a city ordinance that could protect every historic building from going to the dump where it does not belong. This work is different than demolition. It is lovely, if I may say so myself. I'm a little obsessed with it. Once you've taken a building apart by hand, it's like the best puzzle you've ever done, and it's highly addictive. It's very clean work. It's very dignified work. It's a lot more like construction or a lot more like archaeology than it is like demolition. It couldn't be more different from demolition. Our job sites are immaculate. They're as clean as a new build. That's because we spend the first week cleaning the building, especially in the cases when they're a little dirty, which sometimes they are. It's careful, it's respectful. We like to think about this as a way to pay homage and to honor the building even in its decline. And we can often think about these buildings almost like organ donors to go help keep other buildings in excellent health into the future. It's also deeply satisfying work. I find it very rewarding. My team finds it very rewarding. And as such, I wish I could hire all the people who are clamoring for jobs to come and work with us. I get resumes in my inbox all the time, and I don't have the budget to hire them all. And I gotta say, I feel like folks could really benefit. People want to talk a lot about the labor crisis in the construction industry, and I really just don't buy it. I think we have more of an access crisis. I think it's about throwing the doors to this wonderful industry open. Construction is a really rewarding industry to work in. They get really good jobs. You got good benefits, hopefully, and a lot of folks, I think, would like to gain access to these careers. We got to work at breaking down the barriers that exist, particularly for women half of the workforce, y'all. And a lot of people want to tell me that women don't want to do this work. That's just not true. Women are, in fact, excellent at this work. My whole company is full of them. And we're very good at what we do. Enough? Thank you. This is also an opportunity to build community. We have school students out to our decon sites all the time. We're always working with local universities. We're working with the trade schools. In fact, I'm very proud to announce that we are hopefully in final stages of approval with the Department of Labor on the very first registered apprenticeship program for deconstruction of historic properties. This is becoming recognized as a traditional historic trade and recognized as a skill that what this will mean is that anyone across the country who wants to run a deconstruction training program can follow this curriculum. It's approved by the Department of Labor. It puts you in line for funding for registered apprenticeship programs, which is a huge reason why we've done this in the first place, because that will help us a great deal and help grow the industry. We need to normalize deconstruction and help this become the only way to handle, particularly our oldest buildings. And with the success, I hope we'll come to see it as the solution for all of our buildings. Ultimately, of course, the goal being to replace this, which after all this talk today, I hope looks fairly barbaric, right? We're looking to replace this with something that looks more like this. This is my team working on the house I showed you in the beginning with the beautiful stripes, and also like this. Our reuse facility is my pride and joy. It has been, without a doubt, the harder thing. Taking a building apart is challenging, but it is not rocket science. You need to be trained, you need to be safe, you need to learn your safety best practices. At the end of the day, the work to create a healthy, strong reuse market and a facility that can support the cycling of those materials in the community turns out to be way harder, but we have made an incredible strides in that direction, and I'd love to help this community and many communities across the country avoid making so many of the mistakes that we have made and that we have learned from over the years and end up with a tight, tidy, beautiful facility. Salvage yards don't always need to be junky. It can look like this. It can look like humans and not machines. It can look like training and opportunities. It can look like education. It can look like the marrying of sustainability, historic preservation, and construction. And I believe this is the way forward. So I look forward to answering any of your questions as I watch this community move in the direction of deconstruction and reuse. Thank you so much.
Oh, I just want to make one announcement, just to say that obviously we're not going to have time for all of our little breakout groups, but if you look at the back of your program, there's a QR code that'll take you to a survey. We really love to hear, your thoughts about what do you think could work on Nantucket? What are you afraid of? What questions do you want answered? And I'm hoping that you can ask May some of your questions now. If you have questions for anybody else, you do have to leave the museum at 6. So please take food on your way out.
Oh, I went long.
No, everybody did. It's okay. We all did. It's very exciting stuff. So I'm going to stop. Ask May your questions, but please take some food as you leave.
Is there a deconstruction program in Charleston?
Not yet. No, believe it or not. Most of the wonderful historic cities of the Southeast do not have deconstruction going on. We were the first in Savannah. You wouldn't think so, right? All those beautiful historic buildings, they were all just going to the dump until we got in there and stopped it. So I have a lot of friends at the College of Building Arts in Charleston, and we're hoping to get started up there pretty much as soon as possible.
First of all, thank you. And I hope that we're all inspired to do more of this on Nantucket. But my question is, have you reached out to some of these HGTV filming to see if you can work with them, because that would inspire people?
Well, I haven't spoken with HGTV, but I will tell you, we did just get interviewed by CBS Evening News, which was terrifying. I don't know when it's going to air, but we should be on the national news relatively soon, and hoping that we do inspire people to get involved all across the country. So wish me luck. I hope I didn't sound like a dummy. It's pretty scary. Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions? I wish there are so many aspects of this I'd love to do a deep dive on. I'd love to talk about the economics of this. If anybody is in the industry and wants to talk about how this actually works in terms of dollars and cents, catch me after. I love to answer these questions.
But the step that people in Savannah, you don't have an ordinance for
No.
deconstruction. So what's the step that they come, or you go to them?
Oh no, I don't have to do
Does
any.
someone come to you?
They come to us. Like I said, we are flooded with requests for deconstruction. We have a long list and we have to try to catch as many as we can. I can't catch them all. The demand for this service is extreme. I
It
will
wasn't
tell you.
at the beginning, was it?
It happened pretty quick. I'm not going to lie.
great.
We try to be very visible. We work really heavily on social media. Follow us on Instagram at Repurpose Savannah. We like to invite people into this work because we think it's really important for folks to see and understand what it actually is, see the care and the carefulness that we're demonstrating. And so I think the result of that visibility was that a lot of people were just like, heck, I've got this old building. I feel really crummy about the fact that I can't keep it up, but I don't want to tear it down. Here's a solution for me. And they started coming out of the woodwork, no pun intended. And like I said, I need to train other outfits to help me absorb the demand for this service. Not only is it a wonderful way to be respectful and gentle to your historic building, even while losing it, it is also a green product. As we know, the demand for green solutions is only growing. Folks want to be able to do the right thing if we make it easy. Yes.
This is sort of a technical question, but in your deconstruction process, how do you deal with the safety codes, especially with like lead remediation? For instance, Massachusetts, carpenters can't even touch a lead doorway, a casing or anything like that without being a lead licensed remediator.
Well, we are very careful. Safety is our primary concern. You go on our job sites and you're going to see every bit, probably more than, especially in Georgia, of what you're going to see in our contemporaries throughout the industry. Everybody's wearing fall protection. Everybody's wearing lead-rated respirators, gloves, eye goggles, earplugs, hard hats, high-vis. We take it really seriously. The code for whether or not you can touch lead in Georgia is different than in Massachusetts. So as long as we're wearing lead-safe respirators, we can handle it, but we don't disturb it. We also respect the lead. We're not trying to shake it up. We're not trying to sand it or plane it off. When we do rehome materials that are covered in lead, we disclaimer it. We inform and educate our customers, make sure that they know what they're handling. We're not trying to be irresponsible with it. It does have to go state by state when it comes to those regulations. But I'll tell you one thing that we don't play with is asbestos. We get every project abated. And then in the case when we do find additional asbestos material, we get somebody else in there to abate it. So just like with renovation and restoration, people are going to ask those same questions of people that are trying to restore and renovate historic buildings. It's the same approach. Just be smart, take care of your people, protect your people, be safe, be trained. Yeah? All right. Thank you. All right, folks. Oh, we got one more.
I think we have one more.
Okay, and then I'm going to make you take Mary's food.
So you mentioned the economics of it. When someone approaches you, do you give them, like you say, I'm going to do that for $50,000, or how do you price?
Yeah, it's going to be somewhere in there. I take into consideration a lot of factors. I take into consideration the economic realities of my clients. We're in the Deep South. Some folks really can't afford even a demolition. I am a sucker for an old building, so I'm probably going to try to find a way to make it work. And I can do that because we are competitive in turning a margin on most of our jobs. So in the case that I need to, reduce my price a little, I'm turning a margin on just the decon. Right? So if my contracts are turning a margin, I'm still gaining all of that material asset, which I can then sell to help support my nonprofit. There is a cost associated with processing and bringing those goods to market, for sure, but there's still a margin there at the end of the day. So the first thing I'm going to do is, at this point, I can kind of eyeball it because I've been doing this for a long time, but I'm going to say, what's the cost of conventional demolition, right? So it's probably going to cost you about the same. I'm going to shoot to get as close to that as I possibly can. In some cases, deconstruction does cost a lot more. For example, brick. Wow. Brick is a challenge. It's also a thrill. I look forward to it. I could bend your ear about all the ways we're trying to get creative with brick. But at the end of the day, sometimes the deciding factor does come down to the fact that I'm a nonprofit and we can offer tax incentives. However, if you are not a nonprofit and you are not the material hub, I speak directly to you contractors, right? You don't have to be a nonprofit for that homeowner to get a tax deduction to work on this job. So even if you're charging 20% more than a conventional demolition, they're still going to get a tax deduction that's going to wipe out that overage. You're going to make more money. They're going to save more money as long as those materials get donated to a nonprofit, which is often your reuse material hub, right? In most communities, that's what we're seeing. Number one is nonprofit model. Number two, of course, being the city. And cities can come up with alternative incentives to make that math work as well. The numbers can work, believe it or not. It's the biggest myth about decon is that it can't. And as was said also before, places that have been doing this for a long time, the cost has been coming down. It's an emerging industry. Emerging industries almost always start out a little high on the end, on the price point. Give us some time to practice. We've already gotten significantly better at this in the 5 years we've been doing it, and the whole industry will continue to do that as well. Okay, time to grab some food, folks. Thank you for your time.